God, one of the most famous fathers in the Bible, Abraham. But we're not going to talk about Abraham. Uh, as much as I'd like to get into that deep stuff of him and all that went around, goes along with his faith and things like that. I want to talk to you about a little lesser known father in the Bible around the first century. His name was Jairus. The account of Jairus, this father, is written about by Matthew and Mark and Luke, and it unfolds as Jesus is coming back across the Sea of Galilee from the Decapolis area, this area of like 10 cities that were more pagan, and he's coming back to a more Jewish culture that's more God-fearing. And we're introduced to a synagogue leader there named Jairus. And Jairus has a daughter who's dying. And he comes to Jesus to ask him to put his hands on her so that she may live. And Jesus agrees to go to Jairus' house, but on the way, there's this crowd that gathers around Jesus, and they're delayed by a woman with an issue of blood who's pushed her way through the crowd to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. While this is going on, a friend of Jairus' gets to him and tells him, "Don't bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter is dead." And Jesus tells him, "Don't fear anymore, just believe," and continues on to the house of Jairus and raises his daughter from the dead. And this is an account of the faith of a father named Jairus and the things that he must have went through and struggled with concerning his faith in Jesus. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament tells us what biblical faith is. And it says that now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's that assurance, that confidence, that substance, that of reality that you hope for. It's the conviction, the assurance, and the evidence of things not seen. And some years ago, a long time ago, I remember me and Dennis Adams and old Chuck went up on White Top, and we'd seen this somewhere, and we were illustrating this, and we took some pictures of deer hunting, and those guys got out on their knees with their bows, and they posed like this, like they're holding a big 12-point buck. But they had no deer. We just took a picture like that. And that was to illustrate that evidence of what we hoped for. So if you're a deer hunter and you scout out a piece of land and you're looking, when you do that, you're not just looking for deer, you're looking for the big buck. You're looking for signs of him in that area. You find scrapes and you find big horned trees and tracks that you know are bigger than that of normal sized deer. You haven't seen that 12-pointer, but you know he uses that area. And you're confident, you have assurance from seeing the signs, and you're convinced from the evidence that there's a big buck using that area, even though you've never seen him. If we look at a dictionary definition of faith, if you Google faith, you can do that right now. You can Google faith, and it says that it's complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Trust, belief, confidence, conviction, credence, reliance, dependence. It also says it's a strong belief in God or the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension or that mental perceiving and conception rather than proof. But what shapes our trust and confidence in someone or something? Culture, the day and time in which we live, the area we live in, seeing things happen over and over time, repetition, the history of things, their track record. All those things shape our faith, what we believe, what we will put our trust and our confidence in. Let's get into the text. Let's jump in at Mark 5:22. Mark 5:22, he writes, "Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet." So Jairus was a synagogue leader, ruler of the synagogue, it may say in some of your translations. The Blue Letter Bible says that being a synagogue leader or ruler, it was his duty to select readers or teachers in the synagogue, to examine the discourses of the public speakers and to see that all things were done in decency and in accordance with ancestral usage. Now, his name was Jairus, in my Southwest Virginia accent anyway. Now, if your Blue Letter Bible app or Gateway, Bible Gateway, or YouVersion app says something different, then go with that. But I call him Jairus. The name Jairus has Hebrew origins, and it means whom Jehovah enlightens. So Jairus, the synagogue leader, sees Jesus, and he fell at his feet. Now, the word fell that's used here in the Greek is spelled P-I-P-T-O. You say it the way you want to say it. P-I-P-T-O is that verb that he fell at Jesus' feet. And it has this meaning in the Greek: to descend from an erect to a prostrate position. To descend from being erect to being prostrate. Being unlikely that Jairus stumbled and tripped, and he went from being erect to laying on his face at the feet of Jesus, which probably didn't happen, it's better seen that Jairus fell at Jesus' feet in worship. That's a little odd for several reasons. One, as a synagogue leader, Jesus was seen as the enemy of him and of those who've done business in the synagogue. Second, because Jews worshiped only God, not man, they bowed to no man throughout history. Not a Pharaoh, not the kings, not a Caesar. In the book of Esther, it's illustrated in chapter 3 of this of man not bowing to another man, and that was with Haman and Mordecai. In Esther chapter 3, starting in verse 2, I'll read you this account. It says, all the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Then the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, why do you disobey the king's command? Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. The rest of that story is that Esther was put in the king's palace and made queen for such a time as that, to disrupt Haman's plans and to appeal to the king to save the Jews. So it would have been very hard for a synagogue ruler, you see, to fall at the feet of a man, Jesus of Nazareth, nonetheless, in an act of worship. It would have went against his religion and everything that had shaped his faith up until this time. What had Jairus heard, do you think? What had Jairus seen? What was validating to Jairus about this good teacher from Nazareth? What was causing Jairus to be sure of the hope that Jesus could heal his daughter? What caused Jairus to be sure of this? What was causing him to put his complete trust and confidence in a man named Jesus? Well, Mark, who's writing this, tells us earlier in what we call chapter 1 and chapter 3. Mark says in chapter 1 that Jesus was teaching in the synagogue and he drives out an impure spirit. That kind of got him a little upset. In Mark 3, he tells us that he healed a man's hand in the synagogue. Got him a little upset. Could it have been that Jairus had heard about Jesus' healing all these different diseases, the blind and the lame? Perhaps he had nowhere else to turn and he knew Jesus could help. Going against what his religion would say about this blasphemous guy from Nazareth, Jairus goes to Jesus. In Mark 5:23, he pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." The Greek word for that phrase, "so she will get well or be healed and live," is sozo. It has a meaning to save, to deliver, to protect, to heal, preserve, to make whole. And this is the same word that Mark uses several times, especially in this chapter, not only here, but with healing this woman with an issue of blood that's tucked into the middle of this account of Father Jairus and his daughter. Luke in his parallel account adds to this daughter and says that it was his only daughter. This was Jairus' only daughter, a girl of about 12. A 12-year-old girl we're talking about, the father's only daughter. Now, right in the middle of this is another healing miracle that we won't discuss, at least in any great length. Your pastor Justin and I have been talking about this healing of this woman, this issue of blood, and just how rich it is, some good things in there. Let me tell you how graceful and merciful Justin, your pastor, is. While talking about it, he looks at me and says, "Hey, do you want to preach on that?" I said, "No, man. No, that's your deal. You do that. You love it." But he was going to let me do that. So let's make sure he tells us about the woman with the issue of blood. Don't let him forget that. While trying to get through this crowd of people gathered to see what Jesus was all about, a woman with an issue of blood holds up Jairus' schedule. Can you imagine what Jairus, the father, was going through, knowing that his daughter was about to die when he left home to come get Jesus? He was facing public and religious embarrassment by being there. Knowing he had to get to Jesus, he finally makes it to Jesus, gives Jesus his worship, and now Jesus is busy doing another miracle, preaching another sermon, teaching another lesson. Sometimes we may tend to think that way. To think, "Jesus, I came to you with complete trust and confidence, and I haven't done anything yet. I see you've done things in other people's lives. You've answered their prayers. You've acted in an obvious positive manner, but what about me and my situation?" And we start to panic because we realize we're not in control, and we never have been. Jesus is not working the way Jairus may have expected him to. And Jairus may have thought Jesus forgot about him and his need. He's starting to panic, realizes he's out of control, and that his daughter is likely to die. Again, Luke says that Jesus was on his way. The crowds almost crushed him, pressing in around him. Jesus couldn't get through. It's often said the quickest point between point A and point B is what? Straight line. Well, this straight line is getting bogged down by people and their needs. But think about this. If Jesus is not delayed here, and he gets to Jairus' house before Jairus' daughter dies, what's Jesus going to do? And you can speak loudly. If you're wrong, the person next to you probably don't know anyway, because nobody's saying anything. What's Jesus going to do when he comes to this girl and she's sick? What's Jesus going to do? He's going to heal her, right? That's what Jesus does. But that's not God's plan. God's plan is to raise her from the dead. So God uses the crowd. Romans 8:28, Paul tells us, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." And I believe that Jairus had a love for Jesus as the Son of God, which came out of the faith which was started in him by God to start with, and that Jairus was no doubt called to this point in his life and this point in his faith by God. Again, God used the crowd. He uses a woman who needs a miracle done in her life to kind of slow the roll, so to speak, to effect his purpose. And it seems as though God purposely delays Jesus so the girl will die, so he can show who Jesus really is. Not just the teacher, as the people have been calling him, as the people who come from Jairus' house here in a minute to tell him that the girl's dead, call him, but to show that he's truly the Messiah. Mark 35, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter's dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Or better translated, don't be afraid any longer. And the Greek word here that's used for afraid is phobio. Ever heard of a phobio before? We call it phobia. Be afraid, alarmed, startled, struck with fear. Don't be afraid any longer. Don't have this phobia any longer. You've been afraid, but Jesus doesn't want him to have this phobia any longer. What do you think was the number one phobia that was plaguing Jairus right now? The number one thing that he was afraid of right now. His daughter dying. Death. Don't be afraid any longer of death, Jesus may say. Jesus is over death, in charge of death. Hebrews chapter 2, 14 and 15 tells us that since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held by slavery or held in slavery by their fear of death. Their fear of death. You know, that's probably our number one fear. Death. We're afraid of that sting of death that causes sin that Paul talks about. Death from our perspective, or what we have experiences with, anyway, is so final. You know that Jesus didn't heal everyone's disease. He didn't raise everyone from the dead. So why did he heal anybody? Why did he raise anybody from the dead? I think he did it so that he could. To show people that he conquered death. To help people then and now to start to develop that complete trust or confidence in someone or something, and that someone being Jesus from Nazareth, the Christ. Not only to heal, but to be the one who had the power over death. To help us believe that he is the resurrection and the life. Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. Only believe. Pisteuo, Justin has used that before, of believe. To think to be true, be persuaded of, to have confidence. He tells Jairus, don't be afraid of death anymore. Think this to be true. Only believe. Think to be true. Be persuaded of this. In case you didn't know the rest of the story, you weren't listening, Jesus does just what you'd expect him to do. He goes to Jairus' house and he raises the little girl from death to life. But I bet it was hard for Jairus, the father, who had just been told his little girl has died, to then hear Jesus say, "Have confidence in me now." I bet it was hard and unfathomable to be sure of Jesus and have belief in Jesus now, in this time of great sorrow and grief, when it didn't work out the way that you hoped it would. You have complete trust and confidence in Jesus at this time. You were so sure of Jesus one moment, you're singing, "Jesus loves me, this I know." One moment. The next moment, death. Now you're not so sure. Doubt starts to creep in. And doubt starts to work its way into your thoughts. In Mark 9, it's Mark. In response to another father, after telling Jesus about some of the troubles that his son was having with this demonic spirit, the father asked Jesus to drive this evil spirit from his son. And the father asked Jesus, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And Jesus said, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Jesus I can imagine Jesus thinking, you forget who you were talking to? If I can, did you not see if you can? The father of the child said, Jesus said, "All things are possible for one who believes." Then the father, listen to what the father says then, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." I bet Jairus struggled with a little bit of unbelief at that moment, don't you? Jairus had to reconsider his predisposed ideas, his preconceived notions about Jesus of Nazareth and about his religion. Jairus went from a predisposed idea that Jesus was only or just from Nazareth, and that Jesus was only or just the son of Mary and Joseph, to believe in Jesus being the Son of God, the sent one, the anointed one, the Messiah, the Christ. A belief not that Jesus is, but a belief in Jesus. And that causes us to change some things, to realign some things, to reprioritize some things in our lives and in our hearts. Back to the deer hunting analogy. You've seen the horned trees, the scrapes, the big spread-toed tracks, and you believe that there's a big buck in that area. But do you believe in the evidence enough to change the way that you live and function from October to the first week of January? Are you changing your hunting habits, taking off work, getting up early, and staying up late from October to January, believing that you will see that 12-point buck? And that's sometimes what our belief in Jesus will cause us to do. Change some things in our lives. Jairus, no doubt, went through a process of belief in Jesus. Not just that Jesus was, but changing his religious views, his social views, because of that belief, that complete trust or confidence in someone, and that someone being Jesus. Matthew tells us then in chapter 9 about two blind men that were healed. And as Jesus went on from there, two blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And when he'd gone indoors, the blind men came to him, and he asked them, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. Listen to that phrase that Jesus tells them. And let's rearrange some of the emphasis on it. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? Read it like this. Do you believe that I am able to do this? The blind men had to believe in Jesus. Not medicine, not bubbling water, not a star, not a rabbi, not a rabbit's foot, but in Jesus. I think that what Jesus says to these guys is one of the scariest statements in the Bible. Do you believe that I am able? And that's the question that you and I have to answer. Do I believe this? Do I believe that Jesus is able? And we should also be saying to Jesus, I do believe. Help me. Help me overcome my unbelief. Not trying to hide the fact that we struggle with things, that things of this life bother us, that some things in the Holy Scriptures, they're hard to understand and even harder to do at times. Romans 7:15, the Apostle Paul says, I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I don't do, but what I hate to do, I do. The Apostle Paul realized how easy it was to mess up even trying to follow Jesus. And you and I need to realize it too. You're not the only one who deals with disturbing issues. And rather than giving in to temptation or peer pressure or giving up, call it like it is. Ask Jesus to help you overcome your unbelief in those situations. Jesus, help us. Help us overcome our unbelief. Paul also writes in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts, your minds in Christ Jesus. But we continue to be anxious about it. We pray about it, but we continue to be anxious about things and have that nervous knot in the gut because we won't let God have the trouble. We won't give it over to Him in prayer from verse 6. We act like we want God to take it, but we choose to continue to hold on to it a little bit because we're exercising a little unbelief. Now, I know we're perfect, nowhere near perfect in my faith in Jesus. I'm mediocre at best at times. And I don't like the thought that I and others act like we got it all together because we don't. Everyone in here, if you're honest with yourself and with Jesus, should be asking Him to help you overcome your unbelief. Those times where you think you're in charge or that you have to be in charge, when your pride rules the day, when you think that you're all on your own. I think some of those things are the little things, if you want to call them little things, where we exercise our unbelief. Jairus, the father, he had to surrender his pride. He had to surrender his religious thoughts. He had to surrender his social and religious standing. Jairus, the father, had to surrender all his preconceived notions about how things worked, about the man that the rest of his colleagues claimed to be blasphemous. Jairus, the father, had to make a decision based on what he had seen and heard, the confidence of what he hoped for. He had to stop being afraid of death and put his complete trust and confidence in Jesus. Not complete trust and or belief in a particular friend to help you. Not complete trust and or belief that a particular drug or drink can help you. Not trust and confidence in a particular medicine or doctor or therapist or psychiatrist or counselor, but hear Jesus saying to you, do you believe that I am able? As we calm down here and ease into a conclusion, I'll take just a minute out of what I've prepared to share with you this little thing that Miss Danielle gave me a minute ago. That my littlest daughter did in, what class was it? Second and third grade this morning. All About My Daddy by Laurel, age 9. My daddy's name is Aaron. He weighs 90 pounds. I didn't teach her to lie. She got that on her own, but she knows Jesus and she can ask for forgiveness. Goes on to tell about him. Favorite TV show is baseball. Likes to go fishing. Favorite food, fish. His favorite drink is, I'm glad she put Mountain Dew and Diet Mountain Dew. For fun, he likes to nap. I love when my daddy's funny. And my favorite thing about my daddy is he's a preacher. I share that with you when I seen it because Laura was here Thursday night with us, and I remember her talking about what we talked about here after we had got done, and she said, Daddy, that was a sad story. Fathers, wouldn't you like to have a faith like that of Father Jairus? Wouldn't you like to have a father that had a faith like Jairus? I know I would. I know that if something happened to me, I would want my father to get me to Jesus. Yes, hospitals are fine. Medicines are fine. Tourniquets are a good thing. Pain relief drugs, good thing. But get me to Jesus above all. We should strive to be fathers like that. And I know that in 3 of my 4 kids' lives, there have been instances where we put them before Jesus like Jairus and said, Jesus, do something. Times where your life kind of stops when you get the news and nothing else matters to you right now, and the only thing on your mind as a father like Jairus is, Jesus, help. Help, Jesus. Help my son. Help my daughter. Help my wife. Help my parents. Jesus, help. What are you willing to rearrange in your life because of that belief in? That complete trust or confidence in